Welcome to the SPSJ podcast, a parish in the heart of Hereford city centre. Today we're joined by Sandra, one of our Ukrainian refugees who's playing a massive part in the work and the life of SPSJ. Today engaging in this politically hot topic theologically, considering the diversity of the place we live in and thinking what it means to be a welcoming and loving community and church, both individually and collectively.
Hello and welcome back to the SPSJ podcast, and my name's Luke, and I've got to be back on my best behaviour because my boss, Andy, the vicar, is back in town.
I mean, it's about time I've been invited onto this, and I do have one question though, Luke.
Yeah.
Is Heather always in a football kit for this?
Yeah.
Because they can't see this. This is a podcast.
It is her uniform. Heather has a brand and she sticks with it.
Hey, your son has started following it.
Well, I know. And I mean, this is, so I am seriously concerned about this because it is spreading. And the other Sunday, he did genuinely come to church, didn't he? In a full-on football kit, including boots. And I was like...
Yeah, I don't wear the boots.
I was thinking, what's going on? But he was happy.
Hey, I'm not complaining.
I mean, it's interesting because the football kit actually comes up in today's episode, which we'll be getting to in a moment. But before we do that, I just want to say, Andy, where have you been? Why is this your first episode?
I assume it's because, I did have 3 months off on extended study leave. So, I wasn't around. I did have a chapter actually this week, and it's my first chapter back. And
what's a chapter?
So chapter is when all the kind of local vicars get together.
Oh, yeah.
And we kind of chat some business stuff, but some supportive stuff as well. Anything we need to be aware of, all that type of stuff. It's really good. We do it once a month. So it's my first chapter back. Haven't been away, and it's really funny. One that there was a lot smaller chapter because somebody retiring, someone else then being on an extended study leave. But also they kind of went, "Oh, you're back," and it's like, "Oh, we didn't really miss you." So I think they meant it in a loving way, but it is good to be back.
We missed you here.
It is good
and
to be back.
It's good to have you.
It is good.
And it's nice to be on a podcast.
Yeah, it's exciting.
It is. Well, particularly today's episode because we have a really brilliant interview which Heather did with one of our friends, Sandra, a member of our church here. And it's really exciting because it's her story of coming to England as a refugee from Ukraine, and how that journey has affected her, what that experience has been like, and then some reflections on how that's affected her faith. It's a really moving interview. So
I wasn't expecting it, really. No, I mean some stuff that Sandra says, I was quite blown away, really.
Yeah. Well, should we dive in and get listening? Because I think it's a really worthwhile listen.
So, hi Sandra. How are you? You all right?
Oh, hi Heather. Yes, thank you. I'm fine. And you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad, thank you. It's great to have you join us on the SPSJ podcast. It's lovely to have you as a guest. And I wonder if you could just start by telling us a bit about yourself, maybe where you're from and what you're now doing with us at SPSJ.
Okay, I'm a refugee from Ukraine. I fled because of war. I lived in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, the big, flourish city, and I loved my life before war. But then I had to go here, and I'm very happy to be in Hereford. It was absolutely accidentally. It was not planned. I didn't know what the UK is, what England is. I didn't know anything about people, culture. But one thing that British are very friendly and supportive and accepting. That what I know and that what I knew.
Oh, wicked.
And I'm very happy to get to my job to work with SPSJ in SPSJ, because not only I'm doing my work, I feel like I became a church member, if I can say that.
Of course you can. You can honestly say whatever you like. That's fine. So you didn't know when you were moving over to here that you were coming to Hereford. You didn't know anything about Hereford to start with.
Yes, I didn't know anything about Hereford. I didn't I didn't know a lot. Of course, I knew about the UK as a country, but I
Yeah.
didn't know the details, the small things, the culture, all the difference. Yeah, we just fled from war. We were looking for a safe place where we can live, and the UK did a great program offering Ukrainian refugees 6 months of living, 6 months of accommodation by other people who are just letting them inside their own houses and flats. And that's how we get here. And yes,
It's a big change, isn't it? Living with a new family. How did you find that?
oh, we lived very good. We had a very, very lovely sponsor who cared about everything. Uh, Before we arrived and during our living there with her, we lived in first time we arrived. We lived in countryside, closer to Wales, in Stapleton, with our lovely sponsor named Kay. She became a very close friend to me and my daughter. She cared a lot about us, and my daughter's 16 years old cake. It was the most memorable, I think, most memorable moment uh, ordered by Kay, our sponsor. And my daughter was absolutely happy when she turned 16. And it was absolutely amazing cake from, um, oh, I forgot the name. The Dead Bride. I'm sorry, it's her favorite cartoon. The
right,
Dead Bride. So, yeah, and it was 3 floors or 3 stages.
3 tiers, yeah. Wow.
Big cake with the puppets, kind of, and yeah, and we froze the dolls from the cake, the
Yeah.
eatable dolls.
Yeah.
So we still have them in our freezer
Oh,
as
wow.
memory.
You haven't eaten them yet.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
So she's so wonderful that she remembered what exactly cartoon did my daughter like.
Wow.
And just ordered and make a very big, lovely surprise for her.
Oh, that sounds absolutely lovely. And also helping to, feel part of a family as well. So you've come over not just on your own, but with your daughter as well. So how have you both, I guess, found the move and settling in, especially with the language differences? And as you say, this really different culture to what you're used to over in Ukraine. Maybe what's the hardest thing you found, and what's the best thing?
The language was a problem. While I was traveling before somewhere, I was thinking that I know English. But when I arrived to a native speaking country, I discovered that I don't know English and I have to learn a lot. So yes, it was, but it's better than in Germany.
Yeah.
For example, because we don't understand Deutsch at all. But yeah, it was some problems with understanding, but it just came with the time.
I can say your English is sublime. It is brilliant, I think. It's much better than my Ukrainian.
Oh, thank you. I even don't know to say because I know that we have to learn a lot. And the best thing, so Ukrainians have to learn a lot from British. Normal queuing, for example, not rushing into the trains, for example.
Yeah.
Politeness, patience. Yeah, so that's, and the education, which we love
Yeah.
a lot. Me and Rachel, my daughter, we absolutely amazed of how teachers respect their students. So this is the main thing, and respect to everyone. And yes, so what's the best is acceptance for any nationalities, and I'm happy we live in Hereford. Not only Ukrainians, here a lot of different nationalities, and I'm happy like British people are accepting us and make friendship, and we found real, I hope, true friendship. Yeah, the people who we can lean on
Yeah.
Is it right word?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So we are feeling that we are not alone.
Amazing. Do you know what? That's such an encouragement
Yes.
for me to hear, but as well as I'm sure the listeners to hear as well, how much you feel accepted and welcomed in Hereford.
Yes.
It's brilliant.
And
brilliant.
integrated as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, you seem to have settled straight into life here, not just in Hereford, but in the church as well. And I wonder, how has your faith and maybe the church helped you as you've made that move, as you've made that transition over to the UK? How's the church helped you, and how has your faith been impacted or helped you?
I would say also I'm very thankful to God and to people that I've just got into St. Peter, St. James Church, because when I lived in Ukraine, I even can't imagine that I can work in church and be a part of such a great church.
Aww.
And church life and church family, because most of my British friends are from St. Peter's and St. James Church. And I can say that in Ukraine I was Orthodox, and I visited some Ukrainian churches, Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And from the moment we started our travel to the UK, I felt like God lead me and my daughter, and different stages of our trip, God was leading us. Church people, church buses. We even spent one night in Poland in the church.
Wow.
On the way here, and then it's amazing. So I've got this feeling that God is leading me, and then we say I walk under the God.
Wow.
I really got this feeling, and it's very different from we had in Ukraine.
Sure.
The church itself, I mean,
Yeah,
this
what
service.
ways is it different?
So in Ukraine, you have to stand on your feet all the service.
I don't think I could do that. I don't think I could hack that.
It believes that the soul becomes stronger of suffering or something like that. You come, you listen to the service, you put the candle, pray, and leave the candle and go home. Kind more strict, more icons, pictures in the church. Yeah, some strict rules like all women should wear hat, cover their head always. Yeah. It's necessary for Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And in the UK, it's much more relaxed.
Yeah.
You can sing. Well,
we like to think we can sometimes.
Oh, you have a brilliant songs, and I love them, and I sing with everyone else, and sometimes I even dance, and I'm not sure if I allowed to.
Love it. Oh, of course, you dance away. I love it
because the music is so amazing that I just go with my soul, join the music, and enjoy the process.
Oh, love it.
I don't know what else should I say. My mom arrived, and she also a big fan of St. Peter's and St. James Church. We are visiting, trying not to skip.
Yeah.
Doing our best not to skip. On Sundays, we like to visit St. James more than St. Peter's, because just we met some other Ukrainians there more often. But also we like to visit Church for All, because it is Church for All.
It certainly is. That's every third Sunday, isn't it? Up at St. Peter's, our Church for All service. And so you found that helpful. And do you kind of encourage other Ukrainians that you've met to come along to that service as well?
Of course, yes. I always invite anyone who wants to come. So we have some problems, like a lot of Ukrainians, especially ladies, who are the most percentage of refugees. It's women with children. They're afraid that they should wear a hat and a long skirt as in Ukraine, as they don't want to cover their heads. And I say, no, you just can come. You can wear anything, sports suit. You don't need to wear a hat, cover your hair, and a long skirt. You just please come.
Yeah, I mean, I turn up in sometimes in football kit, or I used to when I was playing, and flip flops. So actually, yeah, you can wear what you want. It's, well, obviously it's nice to be a bit respectable, but it is a place where you can just come and be yourself.
And I feel like this is place where I can speak to God, and nothing else important. Yeah, nothing else matters. Just me and God, and it's inside my soul, and no matter if I wear something.
Amazing.
Yeah,
love it.
I hope so.
And of course, there's been an awful lot of suffering and pain that you've experienced before moving over here, and a lot of injustice, not only for your home or for your nation, but also your family. I'm sure as individuals you've experienced that firsthand as well. And people could ask the question about God: if God is a God of love, then where has this suffering come from? Where is God in this suffering? And you've mentioned a bit already how you felt God leading you within this suffering and within this move. But I wonder, has your faith been challenged, or has it grown? Maybe what questions you've asked God as a result of your experience.
Well, I'm not asking God, why is it happening now? I'm not asking this. I understand this is not the question to ask God, because well, the first thing that my faith grew a lot. Before my movement here, I visited church in Ukraine not so often. That's the right thing to say. But now I feel myself as a member of a church, and I know just I have to pray. Just I have to continue praying. And the main thing that God is on the good side, and Ukraine is on the side of good, not evil. So that's how I feel that God anyway support Ukraine in this war. So we need just to have patience. The most common advice I'm getting in the UK: be patient, because Ukrainians are not. They're very quick. We need to do and have everything immediately. So that's it. And for when my husband came to an army, I started to pray every night. So I mean regularly, as every night, and I continue this, and a lot of after I started praying every night and arrived here and got into SPSJ, I started to pray also daily on service, and and I'm happy with it.
Amazing. And I think that's an amazing outlook as well. You said you're not asking God why. Why aren't you asking God why? Because I'm sure that there are many people that are asking God, why is this happening? Why is there so much suffering and hurt? And why is this happening to me? Why aren't you asking that question?
Because it's His will, I should accept it. So I just stop to ask. It have no reason. Yeah, because I think, well, I'm not sure, but on my opinion, maybe someone who is asking God why, or why is it happening for me, they are blaming God. How can I blame God? It's just His will, and we are going on.
Wow.
And He's having His plans for everyone. Wow. And for us and for Ukraine.
And you would say that from what you've said, that God is completely in this. From what you've said, how you said that God is leading you, and you felt Him with you all of this time, and you've said how your faith has grown as a result of the move and everything that's going on and settling into life at SPSJ. I think that's, it's an amazing testimony, I think, to anyone listening, and that outlook of not questioning God, but submitting to God in all things.
And also I would like to say that this feel like God is leading me. I didn't have this feeling. So first time before, I had this feeling in my teenage, when I just come to church. And then I didn't have this strong feeling of leading. for a long time. But now I do have it.
Wow.
I do feel it.
Wow.
Yes.
So, as we wrap up the interview, what advice would you give to any Ukrainians still coming over? Obviously, the need for hosts and for sponsors is still very much there. It's not over yet. It's still continuing. But what advice would you give to any Ukrainians coming over to Hereford, but also to the UK?
Don't be afraid of unknown. British are very supportive and God is helping, so just make a decision and come. For those one who are in doubt, because I know that the war is still, a lot of people afraid of going to nowhere like me, but happily I get into the right place, into the right time. That's what I feel all the time. Yes.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you again at some. I'll do it again. And hopefully we'll have you as a guest again at some stage. But yeah, look out for the interview and for the discussion to come now.
Thank you, and sorry for my English. I feel like I said something not very clearly what I meant, but I was
not at all. Not at all.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be a part of your interview.
Wonderful.
Podcast.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Wow. Yeah, we said, didn't we, at the start, it was a really good interview, and I hope you've enjoyed kind of listening to that. I think one of the things that I was surprised about, and we will get on to kind of talking about refugees, what the Bible kind of says about it, why we felt as a church that we should be doing something to support those coming from Ukraine. But I think the thing that really struck me, it was like the incredible faith and trust that Sandra had in God. I wasn't expecting to hear that. Yeah, it was really just that to not question, I found astonishing, really.
Yeah, I found it incredibly inspiring. The sense of trust, but also the way in which the thing I found really amazing and quite encouraging in the way that maybe I look at unexpected circumstances of my life or difficulties of my life was how it was precisely in the unplanned, the difficult, the suffering elements of it that she could have encountered God's faithfulness and actually like brought her from a place of sort of, you know, quite sort of hesitant faith and not so much involvement in church to really feeling a core member of a church community. I found that very inspiring to listen to.
Absolutely. And to, like, as you say, to not, this wasn't someone who is a regular churchgoer, who'd studied the Bible, but the way she was able to articulate God's hand on those stages was amazing. Yeah.
I saw there's so many themes and questions and thoughts and ideas recurring as I was listening to Sandra's experience. But right sort of at the beginning, right from the start and all the way through, one of the things that was striking me was about the sort of the fragility of our expectations and our control over our lives. I know I for one probably like to think I'm in relative control of my life and that, you know, I can create plans and work towards them. But actually sort of in sitting and listening to the experience of someone whose life was turned upside down due to nothing that they've done, and who's been forced out of their home, out of everything that's familiar, everything that's normal, to a place with a different language, a different culture, where you're reliant on people you've never met. It just really made me realize how much we take for granted and how much we can assume is sort of solid and always there, but which actually can change really quite quickly.
And we've not really known that in this country, have we? Probably since the Second World War. You know, we've lived in relative safety. I mean, there was the kind of troubles with the IRA, you know, but actually the majority of us have lived in safety for a long time, and we don't know what that feels like. And to suddenly, you're forced to flee, or you're encouraged to kind of get out of that town because it's not safe, and your home is suddenly gone, your possessions gone, leaving family members behind often. I mean, we struggle to comprehend that, and I think a lot of people listening will be really struck at how Sandra was able to articulate it in the way that she did. Yeah.
No, definitely. And it sort of struck me, it made me realise how, I don't know, I feel like there's on the news so much. I mean, there's obviously the sort of Ukraine situation and the refugees that have come over from Ukraine, but then there's also this much wider migrant crisis and asylum seeking crisis across the entire world. And I feel like so many countries are grappling with how do they respond to this? How do they balance the sort of the compassion and humanitarian need of these displaced peoples with the concerns of their own economies and things like that. And it's so often we can quickly move to this place of thinking about it as an issue or as a political topic. And actually listening to someone's story of their journey through it, you're reminded of how this is not an issue. This is human beings, and each person's story within every stat that we hear or every tragic headline that comes on. And really, the only thing between, whether it was them or whether it was me is the fact of where I was born. And that's something that, I've had no control over, that I've not earned, that it's such a privileged thing to have. And yet, like, how often can I completely sort of, I don't know, do I relate myself and think about myself in the same way as people who've been displaced in whatever situation around the world?
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well that, as we keep saying, how Sandra articulates how she felt God leading her and with her throughout that whole time. I mean, she didn't come over on her own, she came over with her daughter. And how we can think, oh, what would we do if we were in that situation? If we had to get up now and we had to leave our possessions, leave our homes, leave our families behind, pack a bag and go to a different country. And not just a new place, but a new language, new culture, just everything was new and just completely alien to her. But actually we know as friends of hers how well she's fit in and coped and just overcome so many hurdles in that move as well.
And becomes such like sort of a crucial part of our community here. Like, there's so many things she's doing that we just wouldn't be able to be doing. Like,
I mean, you as a member of staff as well, you walk into the office and you expect to see her. And it's like, if she's not there, oh, where's Sandra today?
Well, she's a big part of the work we're doing with the Ukrainian community still. I mean, I'm trying to remember exactly what the figures were, but I think we'd supported something like 100 hosts, and I think around 80 people who've come over from the Ukraine, which includes about 30 odd kids or something, I think, as well as a church since the crisis started. And to be honest, kind of where we started was right back in February 2021, and I was literally, so before anyone had arrived on our shores yet. I think some people have started arriving in other European countries, but not here yet. I think Boris Johnson was just starting to talk about the Homes for Ukraine scheme and wanting people to come forward to be hosts. But I literally, walking home after a Sunday service or to a meeting or something, I was getting people stopping me on the street saying, Andy, what are we doing about the Ukraine crisis? I had someone ring my doorbell and say, what is the church doing anything?
Yeah.
Even people who weren't going to church were coming to me and saying, what are you doing?
Yeah, I had a neighbour come over who I hadn't really spoken to, who came over to our house to say, do you know how I can donate stuff to Ukraine? I was like, it was quite striking.
It was quite strange, yeah, the immediate response that came. And I remember thinking, my initial reaction, if I'm being really honest, was, well, that's thousands of miles away. I mean, what do you want us to do? Because I think at the time, like we were saying, because we've not had to live through anything like this, the reality of the situation wasn't really hitting home of what was going to be happening. And but I thought about it, I prayed about it, I talked to Tom and Andy and the team about it, and I just came to the realization, we've got to do something. because of actually what I believe the Bible says. So we do have to respond to this somehow. And we started to look at, well, where could we respond, and seeking God's wisdom in that, and realised there was going to be this gap in supporting hosts, and that's where we started. That it was going to be a challenge. It wasn't going to be easy. It was going to be long term, and through that begin to pull kind of other partners in and really start to shape the work in the city. So it was. I'm really proud of the work that everyone has done in this area, and of the work Sandra and Jerry continue to do. And it's just been amazing, really, of how God's worked through this. And
it is. I think it's, so often it can sometimes feel like the church doesn't do that well in the public sphere, but actually it is quite striking that although the church definitely isn't the only place that's coordinating work around this issue, it is quite striking how many cities and towns where the churches have been very key in being centre points for the community to respond in compassion to
absolutely
the needs that have arisen.
And I think we do need to applaud Hereford here. I mean, I think in future podcasts we're going to be thinking around kind of how we talk about our place, but Hereford has responded really well. In the way it's come together compared to other cities, in the way that different organisations, they have regular meetings, they sit around the table and they discuss, and we offer complementary things. I mean, we as a church, we have partner agreements with other charities, in terms of actually you do this, we'll do that, we're going to support each other, and I think that's just wonderful. I thought one of the things that'd be really interesting to kind of reflect on was that actually why we're doing this. I mean, I said a moment ago, the Bible, it was a kind of conviction of what the Bible says as to how we need to respond here. And particularly, if you go away and look it up, the word refugee won't appear anywhere in the Bible because it didn't exist until like the 17th century or something, So you need to be careful how you read the Bible, because you can't just go, well, it didn't say anything about that, so we don't need to do it.
But I mean, Jesus was a refugee, wasn't he? Herod killing all the babies in that horrible scene sort of early in the Gospels, and Mary, Joseph and Jesus flee to Egypt, and his early years, they're a refugee family taking shelter in a foreign country because of the persecution of the place where they were in. And he comes back as, to the place where they were many years later. So
I mean, you've got the Israelites going through the wilderness.
Yeah.
You've got Noah in an ark and not actually being able to see where his home was.
And just so much of the Old Testament law, like the Jewish law, is around caring for the widow and the orphan and the alien and the stranger, and this sort of looking out for those who are vulnerable in society and in the world, and who actually are in many ways at danger of being the outsider.
Absolutely, and there was three words in particular. I mean, you mentioned stranger there, but the sojourner, the stranger, and the foreigner is what is regularly talked about, particularly in those kind of initial Pentateuch passages, the Old Testament law. So to kind of give a quick kind of understanding of that, so the stranger, the foreigner, that's the kind of the term for anyone living amongst the Jews that was from a different ethnic group to the Jews. So that's your strangers and your foreigners. They're permanently living with you, but they're not of your kind of background, your origin. So the sojourners in the Bible, they're the people who are kind of temporarily living with you. So they might be travelling through, but they're different. Again, they're not Jews. And what's really fascinating is the Bible just consistently teaches that you should teach those people the same as you would teach, as you would treat the Jews. Passages like in Exodus 29:3, it says, "Do not oppress a foreigner. You yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners, because you were foreigners in Egypt." Leviticus 19:34, "The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt." I mean, there's this regular theme that seems to come out in the Old Testament. I mean, in English we have this phrase, don't we? Treat others as you want to be treated yourself. But I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah. I was a bit worried with this episode that without Grace here, would be lacking the sort of, the good theological depth, which I feel like she brings to our podcast. But Andy's pulling out words like Pentateuch and Sojourner, so, we're all over it this week.
At least he's explaining them.
Yeah. One of the things, though, I found really interesting about this is, with the idea of the foreigner, maybe we're sort of stepping into controversial areas now, but I don't think we want to shy away from this when we're trying to think theologically about these sorts of things, is that there can sometimes be sort of the palatable and the unpalatable versions of this. And, I mentioned the wider migrant crisis. And if you look at the sort of the national, on a sort of from our government's response to, Ukrainian refugees compared to the rhetoric and the way we talk about the boats crossing the channel and the need to stop the boats, it's two very, very different ways of discussing this, isn't it? And so how do we think this shapes the way that we think about these topics, which can be really quite, politically divisive, and there's lots of very legitimate and strong concerns on different sides as we engage with this issue. And I think as the next sort of 10, 20 years come, it's only going to be an increasing issue with the way the world's going. And that's what's
causing a lot of the rhetoric and the concern is not necessarily just what's happening now, but what might be happening in the future. Absolutely. And I think, so my answer to that would be that something like the story of the Good Samaritan is a great example of this. So you get the initial story, and we all know it, the those who should help walk past and don't. The Samaritan, who's the one you would least expect to help, is the one who goes way, not only helps, but goes way beyond that in terms of the care they show to that person that had been robbed on the path and beaten up. And if you just leave it there, though, you're always in a kind of triage status, if that's where you leave the parable, the story. So you're always responding to need. And I think that's where a lot of the concern then comes in, saying, well, how many people can we keep responding to? And that's where all sorts of fears about, well, can we cope with that? Can we do that? Kind of creep in. But actually, if you step back from a moment and say, there's another way of looking at the Good Samaritan, to say, well, yes, there's the immediate need of the Samaritan on the road, the person that needs the help on the road, but actually, there's the wider concern of that road not being safe. And doing something about the bandits and the robbers and the thieves who did that to the person in the first place. So I think for me, when we look at the asylum issue that we've got, yes, we absolutely, like the Good Samaritan, need to be helping those who need the help now. But you've got to look at the bigger worldwide issue of what's going on and why they are fleeing in the first place. And as a world, we need to address that. Because often we are not blameless within this. So we need to address that issue too.
And it's interesting that from the Ukraine, there has been very clear safe routes to travel to the UK for refuge, whereas generally for the people who are taking the risks of their lives and their children's lives by getting into unsafe boats that are overloaded, that is an act of sheer desperation, because there is no route safer than that risk, and that's quite a striking statement.
And even what's then going on back in their countries, and how, and it can come even down to the way that we live as individuals can actually be contributing to these issues, and we need to kind of almost wake up a little bit to some of this and make sure that how we're living in Britain, what we're doing, is not inadvertently causing crises around the world that then come back, to the phrase, come back to haunt us. So actually seeing the whole of the world as one, seeing everything that God's created as one, and to care for all that God's created is a really important aspect of every decision that we should be making as a country.
And it's really interesting, because I do wonder how do we reflect through what our faith says to the issue of like nationalism and like the sense of countries and how we approach that, or to ethnicities and to cultures. And I was really struck at drawing on the Good Samaritan story, one of the most obvious in-your-face elements of that story for Jesus' original listeners would have been the ethnic dimension, that this is a Samaritan who, you know, the Jews and the Samaritans hated each other because of the history of their peoples and the sort of, you know, their relationship as neighbours and the differences of how they'd split apart as a people. And I've been spending a lot of time in Acts recently, and there's sort of the striking story of the early, Jewish church coming to realize that God was shockingly extending the gospel to the Gentiles, to those who weren't Jewish, who weren't of the ethnic people that have been the people of God in the Old Testament. And there is this kind of this, and then there's this sort of language of, you know, throughout both the Old and New Testament that our citizenship is of a kingdom that is not defined by national borders. It's a kingdom of God. I don't know. Do you think that speaks into the way that we engage with this topic, or the way that we talk about this, or how we respond?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was thinking about when you were saying about the Samaritan, but actually, remember, even Jesus is accused of this. Can anything good come out of Galilee?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even in Jesus' own story, it's there. And I think within that kind of throwaway comment that you see in the Gospels, actually just shows how God is able to take something that humanity doesn't value at all and turn it into the most incredible thing, you know, that saves the whole world. And I think if we can change the way we view refugees, asylum seekers, away from seeing them as a problem to actually seeing that God can, like we heard in Sandra's story, that God can take something that is horrible and we would never want to happen to ourselves and turn it into something amazing and beautiful, you know.
I mean, Jesus, when he asked the Samaritan woman for a drink, like not just in the story that he tells of the Good Samaritan, actually in his own life he demonstrated it. And he didn't just kind of have a chat with this woman, actually he asked for her help. He asked her for a drink. And I mean, we can be so obstructive to that kind of relationship with people from other origins, from other backgrounds and other countries, that we can welcome them, but actually how much do we involve them in what we're doing? How much do we ask for their help? How much do we really seek for their investment in what we're doing, and for them to get involved and be a part of things rather than kind of separating everything out? I think is a really helpful challenge for us as well. And that element of giving and receiving, we love receiving, and sometimes we don't like the giving part. It's like, you know, kids going to a birthday party, actually they want that present for themselves, but yet their parents are telling them, no, it's for your friend, you've got to give it to them, and they don't want to let go of it. And yet when we saw the beginning of this crisis with Ukraine, people were knocking on your doors like, how can we give, how can we help? And yet when it's the asylum seekers down the road in the hotel, actually what is the response that we have there? Well, we don't want to receive them here. We don't want to give. And it's how do we change that mindset and really see those people through the eyes of Jesus?
Well, I think one way we do that is, you know, often adults, this is a big topic for the podcast one day maybe, but often as adults we do like to give, but sometimes if we're not careful it becomes about our need for feeling that we're helping.
Good, yeah.
You know, that we're being good people.
Yeah.
And we have to be really careful about that. I mean, and I hope what we've done with our Ukrainian community is actually we've valued them for who they are in Christ, you know, for who God's made them to be, and sought that actually you can teach us as much as us helping you in this transaction. And again, another Bible passage I would use for this is, it's always striking Jesus' strategy when he sends out his disciples. Take nothing but the sandals on your feet. You know, he's really hammering home the point of, don't go into this thinking you need to be more like me because look what I've got to offer. That is just such a wrong approach to help, you know, and actually go into it as, do you know, actually I need you as well. And it's a really helpful way of approaching this type of work.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about mission as going as the one who will receive hospitality rather than one the host. That's quite different probably to how lots of our like church strategies tend to focus on a bit of an attractional model, like, you know, come to us, like, you know, we're hoping they'll come through the doors, whereas actually to go and be the outsider in another space where you are the one who's vulnerable, the other one who's being hosted, is really striking. I aware of time, I'd love to move us on to something which that makes me think of, which is this whole question of the sort of the vulnerability of this situation, and I guess this sort of, you know, that Sandra doesn't really sort of ask it too much, but I think she says a lot about it through her testimony, of this kind of question of suffering and of evil, and how do we respond to that? How do we engage with that? A couple of things that just really struck me as she was speaking about her experience. One was, I think she said something along the lines of the soul becomes stronger in suffering, which I was like, ooh, that like really hit me.
That sounds like Paul, doesn't it?
I know. and it's, I don't know, sometimes we can feel nervous saying stuff like that because it makes it sound like we're celebrating suffering or kind of validating it as a good thing. And I don't think we need to say, you know, evil is good or suffering is good. But to actually recognize that it can often be a place of tremendous growth, I think is really profound. And so often when we are comfortable, when we're in control of our space, when we're the ones who are in control, we're not very vulnerable, and I think we can sometimes kind of plateau and not grow and not be stretched. Whereas when we're thrown off balance, we do have to rely on God over and over again. And I think she said again, like, I have to pray. Like there's almost, her prayer life is stimulated by the fact that there's no other response to these things that are going on but to pray. Whereas sometimes if everything's going really well, you know, don't really feel like I need to pray, everything's all right.
I think she really taps into what James speaks about as well, when he said about considering it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And she might not have considered herself to have a great faith before arriving in the UK or before going through this experience, but she's living that now. She's a living example of what that trials have produced in her, and what God and the work of his Spirit have done through her and in her, and how she's now being used by God to speak into the lives of other people in a really profound way, in a really supportive way as well. So I can see her drawing on that, about it being, you know, we don't suffer and we are really happy about it, but actually considering it pure joy, because this is God's producing in us something, and you know, we can sit here and see that it evidenced in Sandra, and you guys can hear that from her interview as well.
I think, you know, talking about evil and suffering as well, one of the challenges, and it's taken something like this really, I think, for Britain to wake up a little bit, if I'm honest, that this is not the first major crisis that's happened around our world. It's the first time we've responded well, I think. You know, evil and suffering is sadly and regrettably just part of the fallen world that we live in. And we have ignored that for far too long and lived in prosperity and comfort, and ignored all those around our world who are just badly suffering. And I think this is a real wake-up call for the church to actually, how are we trying to reconcile all things, the whole world, back to Christ? Because that's why Jesus died, not just for Britain, not just for America, the whole world. And you know, and it has been just incredible just to see this response from the church, and I hope is the first of many. I really do, as we really grapple with just seeing through what Jesus started, of bringing an end to evil and suffering in our world.
I guess I hope, along with it being a wake-up call to the sort of the justice angle and the responding in you know, love and compassion to those who are in need, I also kind of hope it will be something of a spiritual wake-up call, because I don't know, I mean, listening to Sandra talk about, and just hearing sort of the journey of her faith over this journey, it made me really evaluate. A part of me was like, you know, I definitely, I feel so fortunate that I haven't been put through those sorts of circumstances. But a part of me was like, I feel like I'm almost missing out on the faith development that comes from that. And I mentioned I've been reading Acts, and the sort of the stories of all the horrendous things that happened to Paul, like shipwrecked and arrested and beaten, and all these sort of things that are going on. And yet later in his letters, he's sort of saying, I like rejoice in these, and like, if there's anything I can boast in, it's in my sufferings.
And if there's anybody
because
listening,
those have been,
'cause I know there are some people who don't like Paul and his letters, and it's not just Paul. Actually, there's amazing examples from the early church, from people when they've been persecuted by Rome, and they're there in their cell waiting to be thrown into the lion's den, in effect, and some of the letters that were written were just phenomenal of the faith that they had, even to the point where they know they're about to die. And still letters from the persecuted church around the world. Incredible examples of just the depth of faith that often, I agree, we struggle to get anywhere near in this country.
It's really interesting that as a rich, privileged, for a lot of the time, a very sort of influential country in the world, we've been able to have this place where we've sort of isolated ourselves and sort of insulated ourselves ever more from suffering or discomfort, and that varies massively within different economic situations within our country. Some people will insulate themselves a lot more because they've got a lot more money than others, but that kind of seems to be the sort of the cultural ideal, isn't it? It's to like, the more you have, the more money you have, the more you can push away suffering, push away difficulty, push away even death, by prolonging your life through whatever. Whereas actually, what good is it to gain the whole world but lose your soul? Is there something quite profound about the way that the gospel can teach us to live a life where we don't need to fear suffering, we don't need to shy away from the difficult, dark sides of the world and life we live in? Actually, by encountering them head on with an awareness of Christ's faithfulness and the way that he's with us and his teaching, those darkest places in our world can become places of light, places of grace, places of transformation.
Yeah, and that's through just that day-to-day faithful living then, and following that example of Jesus, isn't it? And studying the scriptures, living a life of prayer, all of those things. I wrote this down in my notes, and maybe we should kind of finish there without Grace here to keep us in check, you see. But I wrote this down. I wrote that we don't know what is going on. We don't know what the future holds, but we do know who holds the future. And so we trust in God, and we live in a way that God has shown us through the word of God in the Bible and through the example of Jesus.
Well, amen to that.
Amen.
Let's wrap up there. Thank you so much for listening. Join us again next time for another stimulating conversation. I think Grace will be back with us next time.